You have probably been told to forgive and forget. You ever been told that before? Do you find it difficult to forgive and to forget? Whichever end we're on, I think human nature tells us that it's not all that easy. I have forgiven because most of all, Jesus has forgiven me, has forgiven us. And on top of that, it does heal relationships. It's the right thing to do, but I have to admit, there has been times that I have forgiven and wondered if I'm going to forget. I think of a time recently that I forgave, and the relationship is doing well, but there's part of me that says, you know what, that person's probably going to do that again. And what do I do the next time? There have been times, I'm sure you've been through this, where you have been forgiven, but there's a certain discomfort that continues to appear, that you continue to feel when you're around that person. But you see, all of us have had bumps and bruises in our life. And because of that, there have been people who have inflicted pain upon us. And we have done our share of pain inflicting. And all of that changes us. It makes us different. Joseph was a changed person because of the various bumps and bruises that he had gone through in his life. If you remember, with this last Sunday, when we left last Sunday, Jacob's 10 sons, there were 11 sons altogether. They were out in the fields with the flocks. And the thing is that Joseph, the other 10 boys, they didn't like Joseph. In fact, we used a word last week that we don't use too often, but it was in the scriptures. Hate. They hated him. They hated him so much that a few of them planned on how they were going to kill him. But another one of the sons talked them out of murder. But at the same time, they threw him into a cistern with no water, no real way out. Probably some of them thought so he would die naturally, but along comes a caravan of Ishmaelites, and they have lots of stuff. They have a lot of commodities on their camels. So the boys come up with this brilliant idea that they're going to sell their brothers into slavery. They sold their brother out and then covered it up. As sin so often happens, they covered it up. So we pick up where we left off last week, where Joseph has now been sold into slavery. The brothers sold Joseph into slavery. The sons returned and tell Jacob of Joseph's death, while Joseph is taken to Egypt. Some years later, Joseph impressed the Pharaoh. Of course, he impressed him with those dreams. Remember, he was a dreamer. And he started to come up with some dreams that helped the Pharaoh out. And he became second in command of Egypt. When a famine gripped the region, Jacob tells his sons to go to Egypt and to buy grain. They appear before Joseph, who recognizes them, but they don't know who he is. Joseph does not reveal his identity. Instead, he used his power over his brothers. First, he demanded they return with their younger brother, Benjamin. There's been a new boy since Joseph was put into slavery, a young man, Benjamin. And until they do, he imprisoned another brother, Simeon. The brothers were sent home with the grain. And Jacob would not let Benjamin go to Egypt because he had already lost what he thought 2 sons. But when the food ran out and the famine was still severe, Jacob sent the sons back with Benjamin. After seeing Benjamin and sharing a meal with his brothers, they still did not know him. What happened next was either a test of the brothers or a second act of revenge, depending on how one sees it. Joseph instructed his servants to slip a silver cup into Benjamin's sack. Joseph then confronts the brothers about the alleged theft. The brothers beg Joseph to release Benjamin, and Judah volunteers to stay in his place. It was then that Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. And here we pick up in Genesis chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. And he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard as well. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there have been famine in the land, and for the next 5, there'll be no plowing or planting. But God sent me ahead to preserve you for remnants on earth and to save your lives from a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father of Pharaoh, lord of the entire household of the ruler of Egypt. Now hurry, say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and near me. You and your children and your grandchildren and your flocks and your herds and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, your households and all that belongs to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, so can my brother Benjamin, that this is a reality of who you are speaking to, which is me. Tell my father about the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. If you've ever been wronged, how are things made right? If you've ever been wronged, how were things made right? If you've ever been wronged, did that help to get you right? Again, the blessing of bumps and bruises. I worked with a pastor in a church where there were 3 pastors on staff, just like this one. And the senior pastor was a good, holy, and wonderful man. And he was one of those unusual people who was brought up right. he had such a pristine and good and wonderful life growing up as a kid. His dad was a pastor. His mother was a teacher. And he says, gee, all I knew is on Sunday afternoon, we invited missionaries over for lunch. That was his life. So he comes to become senior pastor of this large church in the suburban area, and he sees things he didn't even know existed after this pristine life that he had. But praise God, he had 2 associate pastors, I being one of them, who had led rotten and decadent lives and were able to interpret the seedy side of life to him. We were a blessing to him. You ever been knocked down flat on your face? One of the writers I really enjoy and speakers is a man by the name of John Maxwell. And I remember being in John's presence one time, actually at an event, at a seminar, and he was the speaker that day. And John said this to the people who were present that day. You know, when you fall flat down on your face, as long as you're down there, pick up something. Look around, see what there is to pick up before you get back up again. When you fall down flat on your face, pick up something. Now, I'm going to give you a lot of homework assignments this morning, and you can choose which one you want to do. But one you might want to consider doing is thinking this week is, when you fell flat down on your face, what did you pick up? What did you learn? And then you might want to think about this, which is often asked. Where was God in all of that? Notice, we talk about forgiveness in the family this morning and all that these boys put their brother through. Notice Joseph never says, I forgive you. It's implied, but he never says it. What he says is that God was present in all of this that he went through. All the stuff. God was present in it. Now, maybe another thing to think about this week, with all the stuff that you've been through in your life, where was God present in those times? Where was God present in those times? Now, I want to be clear, because I'm walking on thin ice here for a little bit. Around this is, I do not preach a manipulative God. So you know, I'd like to propose to you that I don't think God sits up there and says, I think I know what I can do to him or her. And boy, they'll get a lesson out of that. What does happen is, in the stuff that we go through, God is present. God's close by. Sometimes it's in a weak, small voice, but God is there for us to listen to. And you know, once again, when we start to talk about stuff people have been through, I have to again say that probably there's some of you folks that might have been through something really, really difficult. And maybe it was hard to see where God was in all that. If that's still in your heart, I'm going to invite you this week to go back and take a look again. And even if you don't feel that healing, invite God into where you are right now, and to kind of work through that stuff that happens, that keeps us from wholeness, but yet God offers us wholeness. Finally, how hard is it for you to say you're sorry? Yeah. I wish I would have written it down, but I heard about a large one of the renowned hospitals in America. And a while back, the administrators of that hospital put out an edict. And because of that edict, their lawsuits, their wrongful medical lawsuits were cut in half. You know how that happened? They told the doctors to go in and say they're sorry. To just go in and to say they're sorry. And, you know, I had a personal experience in my life. The idea of suing a doctor was certainly not on my radar screen. But a young doctor, young dermatologist was fixing something right here on the side of my head, and he bumped it. And he said, "Oh, right away, oh my gosh." And when a doctor says, "Oh my gosh," that usually gets your attention. And he says, "No, I've knocked this open." And he tried to fix this little spot up here. Turned out I had to go through surgery in order to have this repaired. Remember that young man? He was just about to go on a fellowship at Ohio State and was going to learn new surgical procedures as a dermatologist. And he came in one evening to my hospital room, and there were tears in his eye. And he said, "I'm sorry." And I got to say, and really meant it, "It's okay. People make mistakes. People make mistakes. I make mistakes. And you're going to make mistakes too. I forgive you." And I think that young man was able to go off and learn new surgical procedures that help people still to this day. But he had the integrity to say he was sorry. Another piece of homework this week. What would it take for you to have the integrity to say you're sorry? Now, in the midst of all that, I realize, unfortunately, maybe some of the people we want to say that we're sorry to are not around anymore. But they're at home with Jesus. And maybe just to lift up a sorry could cleanse and renew your heart as well. Stuff happens. We're called to forgive. We're called to forget. We know that's not easy without God's help.